Hello everybody, this is Graham Anderson, and today I'm going to be looking at Diceum. Now what first drew me to this game was this cover. There's just something about this that looks so intriguing. Even the sides of the box, although they do show you the name, they show you 4 different names on the box. Then when you look at the back of the box, you realize that there's actually 4 different games in here that all use the same mechanism. I was kind of a little leery about that. Now this game is based around a set of dice that both have numbers and colors on them, and you follow what's called the 2-2-2 rule. You have 2 rolls, you get to do 2 actions, and you can store 2 dice from round to round. And there are 4 different games using that, from a competitive racing game to a cooperative dungeon crawl game. So, is this game 4 times the fun of a single game? Or did they maybe spread out the fun a little too thin in this box? Let's get it to the table, see how it's played, and we'll come back to my final thoughts on Diceum. Here are the main components for Diceum. Since there are 4 games in the box, I'm going to show you the mechanisms common to all games, and I'll be using the racing game as an example. The main mechanism of this game is what it calls the 2-2-2. You get 2 rolls, you take 2 actions, and you can store 2 unused dice for the next round. The dice are what this game is all based around. They have numbers from 1 to 5 and a wild, and 4 different colors: green, blue, yellow, and red. Each player board for each game has the same sort of layout. You get a place to show how many dice you roll, what are the different combinations of dice will do, for example a pair, a straight, 4 of a kind, etc. You have an area showing you what each color will do, and usually color combinations. There's always a spot to store 2 dice from round to round, and usually a place for some tokens that will be used during the game. On your turn, you can take as many dice as it shows across the top of your board. Remember, if you have any dice that are locked, you can choose to keep them as it is, or re-roll them. If you roll the number of dice equal to your maximum limit and you still have dice that are locked, those dice are discarded. Once you've rolled, you decide what 2 actions you're going to do. Either a number combination, again based on the game you're playing, where each combo will have a different effect, use a die or sets of dice for their color. Most of the actions are going to be particular to the game you are playing, but there are 3 universal ones. When you roll a straight, you can increase the number of dice you roll at the start of your turn. To get to roll 4 dice, you need a straight of 3 numbers, so 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then you move your marker up. If you then want to get up to 5 dice that you're going to roll, you need to roll a straight of 4 numbers. If your roll ends up with 2 or more green sides, you can buy upgrades in the center of your board, and again this is common to all games. The cost is going to be between 2 and 5 green sides. When you purchase one for an action, you put a green marker to show that you now have that permanent upgrade. Usually it involves granting you a permanent die of a particular color, so if you place it here, you will always have at least 1 blue die to use each turn. The last universal action is the red die, and this acts as attack or defense. Usually the game mode will dictate how fighting works, but generally when you roll dice, a red face will give you a +1 to your attack roll. Fighting is usually each side rolling a red die and adding any red faces you rolled as the attacker. Then the defender will roll the red die and add any red faces they have stored on previous round or that they have bonuses on their card. And the higher roll is the winner. For example, in the racing game, if you have to make a driving test, usually caused by another player doing an action like playing a card on you, I have to roll the red die and add any red faces of dice I have stored or red bonus faces from my board to get a 6 or higher. Otherwise I have to suffer the negative consequences of the card that was played on me. When you've done your 2 actions, you can store up to 2 unused dice. Place them in the spaces on your board. So that's the basics of the Diceum system. I'm going to go quickly through to show you the 4 modes that come in the game box. The first is the competitive racing game, and it's just a racing game. The first person to get around the track is the winner. You can use the colors to get tokens, which you can spend to take shortcuts on the board. You can also be able to draw cheat cards, which allow you to hamper other players by making them take driving tests, or they can be beneficial to you. The next is a cooperative dungeon crawl game. You have to get in, defeat monsters, open up enough chests, and find the Goblin Crown before the Goblin King shows up and gets to his throne room. But if you ever have to place a goblin on the board and you cannot, then you lose. Or if the Goblin King makes it to the throne room before you've opened up enough chests, you've lost. And of course the number of chests you need to open is dependent on which player has killed the most monsters. The third game is a competitive civilization game. Each player takes a corner of the board and starts to expand their civilization by placing out building tiles. There are also public objective cards that you're going to be competing for, and you'll also have private objective cards to get extra victory points at the end of the game. When the last card of the victory point deck is taken, and you'll be getting victory points as you place your buildings out, that signals the end of the game. You then score points and see who won. The last game is an asymmetrical competitive game where one side takes on the role of the ninjas who are trying to get into the throne room and kidnap the shogun and get him out of the palace, while the other side plays the samurai who are trying to stop the ninja. Ninjas are relying on stealth to go through the shadows, while the samurai are trying to illuminate as many places so they can try and capture the ninjas. Each time a ninja is captured, or the samurai lights a brazier, they remove a threat card. If all the threat cards are gone, the samurai win. The ninja win if they can get in and capture the shogun, and get him off the board before the threat cards are done. So that's the basics of Diceum. I've given you just the briefest of overview of the games contained within, because I could not give you a full in-depth of how each one works. So let's get back to see what I thought about Diceum. So, theme components. For me, the theme just doesn't work. The overall theme of the game is that you're given a set of dice made from this magical metal called Diceum that can take you on different adventures. Okay, I didn't get that at all from the gameplay, and the individual games themselves are pretty themeless. Even the mechanisms are not thematic in any way, so it's a hard pass for me on the theme. As for the components, the dice themselves are nice. They're bright and colorful and very easy to read. I was worried that they were going to chip off this ink or paint, whatever it is in there, but they've held off very well. Now, of course, I do wish that there were more in the box. You only get 11 of these dice and only one battle die. I'd have really liked to have more of both, especially that battle die. At least 2, I think, would be the bare minimum you'd want to have in the box, since often you are rolling against another player. So, I roll the red die, and I have to remember what I have and give it to you so you can roll. The main dice, technically there are enough in the box, but I would just like to have a few spare. As for the other components, the quality of the components is actually pretty good. Nice and sturdy, I should say. The player boards, I really like having the punch outs here to store the different upgrades and bonuses you get and the places to store your die. It just makes it nice and easy, and each board is double-sided for the different games. The art itself is also, it's okay. And I do like that they really differentiated the board. So this is the Civ board, and this Civ board, to me, looks very different from the Dungeon Crawl board. So that's nice. Now, the components they're fine. They're nothing spectacular, but fine. So on to the gameplay. The main mechanism of the 2-2-2, 2 rolls, 2 actions, and store 2 dice, is an interesting idea to try and create games around. And that's what this really feels like happened here. Some came up with the idea of using dice not only for number combinations, but for color combinations. And they decide to make games based around that. And the idea is an interesting one because you can teach the basics once and play 4 different games with only minor variations to learn. But the games do, I feel, kind of suffer because of that. It feels more like an academic exercise than a board game design, fully fleshed out design. Because the die mechanism is just not that interesting. You're kind of rolling to see what actions you can perform. There are some decisions to be made, especially the upgrades on your board, and rolling more dice is always useful, but you're kind of beholden to whatever you rolled. You want to move during the racing game, but didn't roll any movement dice? Oh well, especially at the start of the game when you're only rolling 3 dice. Hopefully you have a card you can play. But even with the randomness, what about a teaching tool to have people try different styles of games? Well, you know what? Why don't we talk about the different games? I'm glad that they did have 4 different feeling games in the box. You want someone to try a racing game, a dungeon crawl game, a civilization game, and a head-to-head game, all using familiar mechanisms? Well then, maybe this is the one you should buy. But, and this is the big but, that works if the games themselves are good, interesting, and engaging. And this was the main downfall for me in this game. None of these games are great. There are, for me, definitely some games that are better than the others. The racing game I kind of felt was boring. Once someone had a skip or 2, it's kind of hard to catch up, as they have a technology tile that allows them to bypass certain pieces of the road. Now the cooperative dungeon game was, I think, probably my favorite of the bunch. You need to get in, kill the bad guys, open chests, all the while drawing cards that could be helpful or hurtful and maybe bring out more goblins on the board. It worked really well as actually a co-op game, because you need to be talking to each other to make sure you achieve your goals by the end before that Goblin King reaches the throne room. Now the Civ game definitely doesn't feel like a Civ game, but it was my next favorite game in the box. I think it's because there were many things you could be going for. You have the public goals, you have the private goals, and getting your buildings out into the board all kind of felt that you kind of needed to do that. There's also the philosopher cards, which you could get, which will give you an extra action, or maybe make one of your actions better. I thought that was really well done, and kind of the most fleshed out game in here. The Shogun game, though, I didn't like at all. I liked the idea of the game, but the implementation felt like it really needed some more work. Now, even with the games I preferred, the Dungeon Crawl and the Civ game, there's kind of no way I play the version in this box over a real racing or Civ game. The ones in the box are okay. They're not great, but within the constraints of the main mechanism, they work. All the games are also fairly quick. Even at the full player count of 4 players, we managed to get them played in under an hour. And when it was just my wife and I, it was down to like 20 or 30 minutes. So, Would I recommend Diceum? No, I don't think I would. The main idea of the game, that there's one common mechanism that is found in all 4 games, makes it easier to teach and is a good idea. The dice and most of the components are good quality. The games are short and do give you a taste of what a full game that style may be like. And maybe it could be used to introduce people to different styles of games with less upfront learning. But none of the games are really good. They're just okay. And there are so many better games in each genre that are in this box. I don't think having 4 mediocre games in one box is a big enough positive to overcome the mediocrity. The goals of the games are different, but what you do to achieve them is the same, and it kind of gets monotonous after a while. I do think that they succeeded in what they're setting out to do, create 4 games with one mechanism. But I don't think it ended up being something that I want to come back to on a regular basis. So I'm going to give this game a 5.5 out of 10. It's an interesting idea that succeeded in doing what it set out to do. Unfortunately, I wasn't a big fan of the final outcome. And that's it for the moment. Until next time, thanks for watching.